Hello, my name is Kay. Welcome to ArtBookNook. Here I love to share my collection of art and craft books. In this video, we're going to explore the latest book from David Bellamy, Watercolour and Beyond. Including this book, can you believe that David has published 21 books in total and created 8 DVDs with APV films, while also teaching painting courses around the world and serving as a consultant for the Leisure Painter magazine. His watercolours are held in many private collections, including those of Sir Chris Bonington, Bill Bryson, Sir David Attenborough and Chris Packham. Quite a pedigree, don't you think? David says, in this book you'll discover a world of inspiration beyond pure watercolour, with over 60 original approaches and exercises. As you can see from these 2 content pages, this book is absolutely jam-packed with information, so I thought it best to split this review into several parts. And this is part 3, where we'll continue with exploring developing your painting style, but in this section we'll focus on using gouache with watercolour, adding figures, different masking techniques, adding visual texture and also adding physical texture. We begin with using gouache alongside watercolour. Gouache is a water-based paint with excellent covering power for even dark colours in your painting. Normally, David only uses gouache for adding seagulls, white mass or small flowers, but the illustrations that follow will show you how much further you can take this medium. In the painting Exton Village Under Snow, David has used white gouache to add snow to several of the tree branches. In his painting Still Evening, white gouache was used again for the sliver of light in the sky and the reflection in the puddle. In the painting Snowdonia Cottage, David used white gouache to add the fence posts and cow parsley in the foreground. On the right-hand page in Wintry Squall, he's used white gouache again, this time to suggest sleet sweeping in from the left. David explains exactly how he achieved this effect, and he encourages you to try it for yourself by following his step-by-step demonstration paintings. You don't have to think of gouache as just an afterthought. You can actually use it right in the middle of the painting process. In Clouds Rising over Crib Goch, David painted in the white gouache for the clouds, whilst the sky wash of indigo and lunar black was still wet. He even swirled in some phthalo blue to create shadows. In Crashing Surf bottom left, the white gouache was added with a painting knife for bold textured highlights. And in Wild Coast, David combines both the wet in wet and the knife techniques for even more impact. I really love these paintings. I think they all have drama and movement, don't they? Figures will add a sense of life to any landscape. They instantly become the focal point in a composition, which is very useful in a painting where there is no obvious centre of interest. Some subjects, like towns, harbours or villages, really call for figures to make the scene feel believable. Take a look at how the architectural details behind the figures on the left have been softened or simplified, so the people really stand out as the focal point. When you're painting groups of figures, it's important that they relate not only to each other but also to the environment they're in. Masking fluid isn't just for the standard techniques we looked at earlier in David's book. It can be a really creative tool in lots of different ways. David shows you here how you can apply it with a painting knife to get extra fine lines, something that's tricky, if not impossible, with a brush. Take a look at how he suggests the delicate cow parsley using horizontal line work. In his painting of the hippo pool, David masked the lower bushes and then laid a wash of Apatite Genuine over most of the painting once the masking fluid was removed. He also mentions that he finished this piece quickly, not just because hippos can be quite dangerous, but mainly because of the appalling smell. Depicting scree, which are the loose rocks that tumble down mountain slopes, along footpaths or even pebbles along a beach, can be really effective using a heavily textured paper like Knot, along with a dry brush loaded with colour but very little water. You can also add small rocks by dabbing in blobs of masking fluid first, letting them dry and then painting over the top. It's a simple trick that really brings a surface to life. On the right hand page is a close-up of detail from a full painting of David's, which appears in his Arctic Light book. And it was painted using the technique described here. David often uses the scumbling technique on a rough paper surface, like knot, to create wonderful visual texture. When you combine scumbling with masking fluid, it works brilliantly for rocks and even the edges of clouds. And remember, you don't have to put masking fluid only on bare white paper. You can also apply it over washes too, wherever you want to preserve part of the painting. And David reminds you, use an old brush for this. Masking fluid will ruin your best sable brushes. Creating visual texture will really lift a painting and make it more engaging. In David's piece, Sunshine and Mist on the Wye, take a close look at the large rock on the left. All that texture was created entirely with paint and clever brushwork. David explains exactly how he achieved it, so you can try the same techniques yourself. David mainly uses watercolour pencils for sketching, especially in misty wet weather or when it's snowing, as they allow him to keep working despite the conditions. But there's no reason why they can't be used to enhance a watercolour painting too, especially Derwent Inktense pencils with their rich vibrant colours. And here David shows how to capture the magical effect of thousands of starlings in flight, those mesmerising gatherings known as murmurations. And used on a wet surface, Inktense pencil can be gently smeared with a clean finger or brush. Laying plastic food wrap over a wet wash can create some fascinating texture, especially if you bring in more than one colour. It's a great technique for suggesting plants and undergrowth, and David also finds it works really well for icy surfaces or the natural striations you see in rock formations. Some pigments naturally granulate, and you can push this effect even further by using granulation medium, especially on a rough knot surface paper. Squirting the medium into a wash of granulating pigment can create some truly exciting textures. Just look at the effects David achieves here. While he often uses dry brush to capture scree, in his painting of Snowdonia he took a different approach. Laying down a wet wash of Lunar Black and Bloodstone Genuine, then squirting in granulation medium and tilting the board so the pigments flowed down the slope of the mountain. It's very effective, isn't it? On these two pages, David shares his key tips for getting the best results with granulation medium. I have to say, I really love the semi-abstract quality of his painting, Estuary Scene with Birds. It's a perfect example of how this technique can add atmosphere and depth. I'm really looking forward to trying it out myself. Across these two pages, we see David throwing caution to the wind and getting really experimental with granulating pigments and granulation medium. He admits this approach can lead to some really exciting results, and also some really exciting rubbish too. But he says it's always worth a try and encourages you to give it a go. The counterpart to visual texture is physical texture, and over the next few pages we'll explore exactly that. We begin with Aquapasto, a medium you mix with watercolour paint in equal proportions, although David suggests using a little less water in the mix. It creates a subtle impasto effect. Impasto is an Italian word for mixture, and in painting terms it describes a technique where paint is applied thickly enough that brushstrokes or palette knife marks remain visible. It's perfect for adding detail to twigs, grasses, tree branches, masts and many other landscape features. In Pagham Harbour on the left-hand page, the foreground has been enhanced using Aquapasto, while in Damp Morning, including it in the mix makes the netting far more effective. Gesso is a primer that can be applied with a roller, brush, spatula or painting knife, and it's often used with watercolour to build texture. However, David points out that watercolour doesn't always adhere well to gesso, and that can actually be an advantage. By rubbing colour off in certain areas, you can create highlights and interesting effects. On these pages, you'll find several examples where David has used gesso to add extra depth and character to certain areas in his paintings. And here is a step-by-step demo called Approaching Alpine Storm for you to try this out for yourself. While gesso can work well with watercolours, it's a little unpredictable. Watercolour ground, on the other hand, is specifically designed for watercolour work. Not only is it brilliant for creating striking and dramatic textures, but it can also be used in a soft, more subtle way. There are two main types, the Schminky version, which is transparent and liquid, and the Daniel Smith version, which is more like a gesso paste and comes in different colours. On these pages, David shares several examples of how he's used watercolour ground, along with step-by-step details so you can try the technique for yourself. One of my favourite paintings of David's is this one, Huskies in the Snow. I think it's a beautiful atmospheric piece, and you'll also find this in David's book Arctic Light. I don't actually own Arctic Light yet, but I think I'm going to have to treat myself. Found materials can also be embedded into Daniel Smith watercolour ground to create wonderfully tactile textures. Using a painting knife, you can press items such as cord, bandage or fabric into the wet ground and then plaster over them. This needs several days drying time before you paint on top. Here David shares his own tips for success with watercolour ground along with two fascinating examples. In Cottage above Ross Gadfan, top right, he glued a couple of cut strips of bandage to the paper to suggest fencing, combining both Schminky and Daniel Smith ground to achieve different textures. In Moorland Cottage, bottom right, short strips of cord were pressed into the surface, then covered with Daniel Smith ground, adding a subtle yet striking dimensional quality to the finished piece. Collage can take many forms, from delicate layers of tissue paper to bold cutouts of figures, signs, words and more. Personally, I think collage is an underrated art form. There are some truly fantastic collage artists out there, and I'm planning a video soon to showcase them. What I love most is that collage lets you break the rules. You can combine almost anything, and it's a brilliant way to make a statement or add humour to your work. Anyway, back to David. On the left, he shares two examples where collage was used to create the texture of rocks. One combining oil pastel with collage and another using tissue paper. In the top right example, David has glued torn pieces of a map into the background, while in Casa Mauricio, bottom right, the neon sign was cut from a photograph and applied directly to the painting. Tissue paper isn't something David reaches for often, but he admits it can produce some very striking textural effects. In his demonstration painting, Farm at Lanfilo, he explains how he applied tissue paper to create the furrows in the snow. And in his painting on the right-hand page, the natural crinkles in the tissue were used to suggest fissures and other features in the rocky foreground. Well, this concludes part 3 of the book of David Bellamy's Watercolour and Beyond, where David reminds us that texture, whether visual or physical, can completely change a painting. From scumbling, masking fluid and granulation, to aquapasto, gesso, collage and even found objects, David shows how experimentation can lead to exciting and unexpected results. The message is simple: don't be afraid to play, because that's often where the magic happens. Part 4 of this series is all about a fresh direction and interpretation. People often believe you can't change or rescue a watercolour painting, but David will share how you can reinterpret and alter subjects. He will explain how to choose the right media and techniques to turn a disappointing piece into something you're proud of, and he also offers plenty of ideas for giving your work a life beyond hanging it on a wall. So I hope you'll join me for part 4. Meanwhile, in the description below, you can find out more about David Bellamy and his work. I've linked to David's website and his social media channels, And there are also a couple of links to some YouTube videos where David is actually demonstrating. And if you can't wait, you'll also find links of where you can buy your own copy of David's incredible book. I hope you found this review helpful. If you did, please give the video a like. It really helps YouTube share it with others who enjoy art books too. I post a new art book review every week, so if you'd like to see more, do consider subscribing. I truly appreciate it. If you found the review helpful, please feel free to leave a comment below. I reply to every one. And if there's an art book you'd like me to feature, just let me know. I'll do my best to review it for you. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting.